Absolute power doesn't just corrupt, it untethers. It dissolves the boundaries between will and reality, between desire and possibility. For a Roman emperor, the world is a stage, and every person in it is just a player in their drama. But what happens when that drama is fueled by a grief so profound, so monstrous, it tries to defy death itself? What happens when an emperor, in his sorrow, decides to resurrect his lost love by stealing the identity of a living boy? This isn't a myth. This is the story of a twisted love that echoed through the halls of power, a story of obsession and the complete annihilation of a young man's soul. This is the shocking, true story of Emperor Nero and the boy he called Sporus. In the final, desperate days of his life, a young man once called Sporus was given a terrifying choice: face public humiliation in the Colosseum as the unwilling star of a grotesque play, or take his own life. He was a trophy, a living ghost passed between powerful men, his very identity a spoil of war. To understand how a teenage boy ended up as the wife of an emperor and a pawn in the brutal power games of Rome, we have to go back to a moment of violent grief, to the moment a heartbroken Emperor Nero decided to bring back his dead empress, no matter the cost. To understand the madness that seized Nero, you first have to understand the man. He wasn't born a monster. He was forged into one by a world of paranoia, intrigue, and unlimited indulgence. Ascending to the throne at just 16, Nero was an artist trapped in a politician's body. He craved the roar of the crowd, not the hushed reverence of the Senate. He saw himself as a performer, a poet, a singer, a star. But this artistic temperament was paired with a deep-seated insecurity and a frightening capacity for cruelty, a personality likely warped by a childhood devoid of genuine affection and dominated by his power-hungry mother, Agrippina. Nero's world, however, had one brilliant, stabilizing star: his wife, Poppaea Sabina. She was, by all accounts, one of the most beautiful and cunning women in Rome. Nero was utterly infatuated with her. After a complex web of affairs and political maneuvering, which included divorcing his first wife Octavia, he finally married Poppaea in 62 AD. For a time, she was the center of his universe. She was his empress, his confidant, and the mother of his short-lived first child. But this obsession wasn't destined to last. In 65 AD, the story takes its dark catalytic turn. The ancient sources, all uniformly hostile to Nero, paint a grim picture. The historian Tacitus reports that after an argument with a heavily pregnant Poppaea, Nero, in a fit of rage, kicked his wife. She died soon after. While modern historians rightly caution that this account comes from biased sources and that Poppaea may have died from complications in childbirth, the story that stuck in Rome was one of murder. Regardless of the cause, Nero's reaction was anything but normal. He fell into a chasm of grief so deep it was theatrical, monumental, and terrifying. He refused to have her body cremated in the traditional Roman way. Instead, he had it embalmed with exotic spices, like a pharaoh. He delivered a glowing eulogy at a lavish state funeral where a year's worth of Arabia's incense was burned in her honor. He then had the Senate declare her a goddess, a diva, and built a temple for her cult. Nero's grief wasn't a private affair. It was a public spectacle, a declaration to the world that he had lost something irreplaceable. And in his mind, if the world had taken his goddess from him, he would simply force the world to give her back. Nero's mourning wasn't the quiet sorrow of a widower. It was the raging, narcissistic grief of a god whose prized possession had been stolen. The palace became a mausoleum to a single memory. He was unhinged by her absence. According to the historian Cassius Dio, Nero began searching desperately, obsessively, for someone who resembled his lost Poppaea. But memories weren't enough for an emperor who believed his will was reality. He needed more. He needed her back, in the flesh. And then he found him. History tells us little about the boy's origins. He was likely a pure delicatus, a young slave or freedman chosen for his beauty, perhaps already part of the imperial household. His name was Sporus, but what made Nero's gaze fall upon him was a chilling coincidence. Sporus bore an uncanny, startling resemblance to the dead Empress Poppaea Sabina. For Nero, drowning in his pathological grief, this was a sign. It was an opportunity. Looking at this boy, Nero didn't see a person with a life, a history, or a soul of his own. He saw a canvas. He saw a vessel. He saw a chance to perform his greatest, most terrible artistic creation, the resurrection of his wife. The plan that formed in Nero's mind was a testament to his delusion. He wouldn't just keep the boy as a companion who reminded him of Poppaea. He would transform him into Poppaea. He would erase Sporus from existence and replace him with a living replica of his lost love. The life of the boy named Sporus was over. A new, terrifying reality was about to be forced upon him. The transformation of Sporus wasn't a gradual descent into madness. It was a systematic and brutal process of identity annihilation. This was Nero, the artist, at his most horrifying. His masterpiece would not be a statue or a poem, but a person, sculpted by blade and terror. The first step was castration. For Sporus, it was the physical seal of his stolen future, a brutal act ensuring he could never be a man in the Roman sense. According to the historian Cassius Dio, Nero's obsession went even further. He reportedly offered a fortune to any physician who could physically turn the boy into a woman, a fantasy that the medical science of the first century could not fulfill. With Sporus's masculinity surgically erased, the psychological deconstruction began. He was stripped of his name. In the palace, he was to be called Poppaea or Sabina. To call him Sporus in the emperor's presence would have been an unthinkable and likely fatal transgression. He was forced to wear the lavish garments of the deceased empress, the fine silks, the intricate jewelry. A mistress of the wardrobe was assigned to manage his appearance, ensuring he looked the part of an empress at all times. He was taught to mimic her mannerisms, her voice, her posture. Every trace of the boy he had been was systematically scrubbed away and replaced by the ghost of a dead woman. The culmination of this horrific project was the wedding. This wasn't a secret ceremony. Nero, in his audacious defiance of all Roman norms, married Sporus in a public ceremony in Greece. The historian Suetonius tells us it was performed with all the usual ceremonies, including a dowry and a bridal veil. Imagine the scene: the emperor of Rome taking a castrated boy as his bride, attended by courtiers who had no choice but to applaud. He called Sporus his wife, his lady, his empress. He wasn't just indulging a private fantasy, he was using his imperial power to force the entire world to participate in it. One Roman was heard to make a grim joke that the world would have been better off if Nero's own father had taken such a wife. It was a bitter, dangerous witticism that revealed the horror simmering just beneath the surface of forced compliance. For Sporus, marriage to Nero was not the beginning of a new life, but the start of a living death. He was no longer a person, he was a prop in Nero's delusional drama. He accompanied the emperor everywhere, a constant public fixture at his side, always dressed in the opulent regalia of an empress. He rode in a litter, attended by servants, and was addressed with the honorifics due to the emperor's wife. The psychological torment must have been unimaginable. Every waking moment was a lie. He was forced to be the mirror in which Nero saw his dead wife, a constant breathing reminder of the woman he both mourned and had allegedly killed. Modern historians often call him a living doll, and it's a hauntingly accurate description. He was an object for Nero's obsession, denied any agency, any identity, any escape. While Nero was already legally married to his third wife, Statilia Messalina, he treated Sporus as his true empress. He had also previously entered into a marriage with a man named Pythagoras, but in that relationship, Nero had played the role of the bride. With Sporus, Nero was the groom, reenacting his marriage to Poppaea in a perverse and public display. There's a chilling story from shortly before Nero's fall that speaks volumes about Sporus's state of mind. During a festival, Sporus gave Nero a gift, a ring engraved with a scene from mythology, the rape of Proserpina, where the young goddess of spring is abducted by Pluto and forced to be his bride in the underworld. Was this a desperate, symbolic cry for help? An acknowledgement of his own abduction? Whatever the intent, it was seen as a terrible omen of the emperor's impending doom. Sporus was trapped in Nero's underworld, and soon the emperor himself would fall into the dark. The final years of Nero's reign were a chaotic spiral of rebellion and collapse. His extravagant spending and tyrannical behavior had bred widespread resentment. By 68 AD, the empire was in open revolt. The Praetorian Guard, the emperor's own bodyguards, deserted him. The Senate, finally sensing its moment, declared Nero a public enemy. His world crumbled overnight. The artist emperor was now a fugitive, fleeing Rome with a handful of companions, and among those 4 final companions was Sporus. Even at the very end, as his power evaporated and death closed in, Nero clung to his living effigy of Poppaea. In his final moments, hiding in a freedman's villa, Nero lamented his fate, famously crying, "What an artist dies in me!" As horsemen approached, he turned to his companions, begging one of them to kill him. He even turned to Sporus, asking his empress to begin the ritual lamentations for him. But in the end, it was with the help of his private secretary that Nero drove a dagger into his own throat. With Nero's death, the cage door swung open. But for Sporus, this wasn't liberation. It was merely the exchange of one master for another. The very identity that had been forced upon him now made him a valuable prize. Before Nero's body was even cold, Sporus was taken by the Praetorian prefect Nymphidius Sabinus, the man who had betrayed Nero. And in a grim continuation of the horror, Nymphidius also treated Sporus as his wife, calling him Poppaea, to legitimize his own bid for the throne. The year following Nero's death, 69 AD, is known as the Year of the 4 Emperors, a bloody period of civil war. For Sporus, it was a terrifying whirlwind of being passed from one hand to the next. After Nymphidius was killed, Sporus fell into the hands of Otho. In a bizarre twist, Otho was the original husband of the real Poppaea Sabina, the man Nero had exiled to marry her. Now, Otho possessed the tragic living echo of the wife he had lost. But Otho's reign was short-lived. He was defeated by his rival, Vitellius, and took his own life. Once again, Sporus was passed on, a spoil of war delivered to the new emperor. But Vitellius had a different and far more cruel fate in mind. He saw Sporus as a tool for public humiliation. Vitellius planned a spectacle for the gladiatorial arena. He would stage a reenactment of a famous myth, the rape of Proserpina, the very same story from The Ring. And Vitellius decided that Sporus would be cast in the lead role of the victim, Proserpina. He was to be publicly, theatrically degraded and likely killed in the arena for the amusement of the Roman crowds. This was the final unbearable humiliation. To have his trauma turned into a public spectacle was a fate worse than death. For years, Sporus had been denied any choice over his own body or life. Now, faced with this ultimate degradation, he found one final act of agency. He had one choice he could still make. Sometime in 69 AD, at an age thought to be no older than 20, Sporus took his own life. He chose a private death over a public humiliation. It was the only way to finally escape the ghost of Poppaea Sabina and the men who sought to possess her. His suicide was his last defiant act of reclaiming himself from a world that had tried to erase him completely. The story of Nero and Sporus is one of the most disturbing episodes in Roman history, a testament to what happens when unchecked power and profound grief collide. But what was driving Nero? Was he simply a monster? A man driven mad by grief? Or something else entirely? Many analyses, both modern and ancient, point to Nero's psychology as profoundly disturbed. His paranoia, vanity, and cruelty paint a picture of someone with severe narcissistic traits. His obsession with Sporus can be seen as a pathological coping mechanism, a complete denial of reality fueled by his inability to process loss. He didn't just want a replacement, he wanted to reverse death itself, a desire so powerful it led him to commit one of the most profound acts of identity theft in history. However, we must be critical of our sources. The main accounts of Nero's reign come from historians like Tacitus, Suetonius, and Cassius Dio, all of whom were writing after his death and belonged to the senatorial class that despised him. They had every reason to portray him in the worst possible light, to sensationalize his actions as part of his official condemnation. And yet, the story of Sporus is so consistent across these different sources that its core events are almost certainly true. While motivations may be embellished, the facts remain. An emperor castrated a boy who resembled his dead wife, married him in a public ceremony, and forced him to live as her. This act was so profoundly transgressive that it can't be dismissed as mere propaganda. It reveals a man so consumed by his own desires and so insulated by his power that he saw another human being not as a person, but as raw material for his own emotional needs. In the end, Sporus's story is a tragic footnote in the biography of a notorious emperor. He is remembered only because of what was done to him. He stands as a silent, haunting symbol of the ultimate victims of absolute power, those whose names, bodies, and identities are consumed and discarded by the whims of the powerful. His short, tragic life is a dark mirror, reflecting the terrifying potential of a grief that refuses to let go and a power that knows no limits. How does the story of Sporus change your view of Roman power or the nature of grief itself? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this glimpse into one of history's darkest chapters compelling, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next exploration into the forgotten corners of the past.